Hello, subscribers and new people from all across the world, hopefully. I'm Martina. This is
Lyzeth.
Yes, and welcome to our channel. So, as you may have seen from the previous videos that we have been putting out the last few weeks, we are doing interviews with each other to get to know each other a little bit more, and so also you all can get to know us a little bit more, and just really talk about our experiences being women of color, especially in during these times that we're in. And so last time, Lyzeth interviewed me. So now it's time for me to interview her. So she's in the hot seat today. So, we just gonna kick it off and get started. So Lyzeth, thank you for being here. Yes. My very first question to you, how was it growing up in Chicago? Or even Illinois, but I think you spent most of your time here in Chicago.
Yes. Oh my God, that's such a broad question. But I guess we'll go from the beginning. It's an interesting growing up in Chicago for me, and I think I've been thinking a lot about it more, especially since I know we interviewed you a few weeks ago, and I had a little bit of chance to think about it. But really, growing up, you don't particularly think about it. You just grow up and you go through your everyday things. But I think as an adult, I've had the chance to really think through a little bit more of what it was growing up in Chicago, growing up as a first-generation Mexican American here, having immigrant parents. So I think that all has shaped my experience in Chicago. And I'll go back. Like, my parents came to this country in 1977. So they have spent pretty much their whole adult life here in Chicago when they came. And it's interesting for me to think back to when we lived in Little Village, which is, if you're from Chicago, it's sort of that predominantly Mexican community here. And I only lived there till I was about, I think I was gonna turn 5 when my parents decided to move out of there. So I don't have a lot of I lived in Little Village experience there, but we moved out further southwest, and it's in sort of the West Lawn, Chicago Lawn, Marquette Park area where we moved out to. And that was interesting because when we moved here, we were probably the first, I would say, Mexican Latino families to move into the neighborhood. I think we were the first one on our block. I think we were the first one, and it was we had Polish neighbors, we had a cop that lived across the street, because we do have a police station not too far from where we live. And there are the families that were literally our next door neighbors. They were Arabs. And so it was just a completely different sort of atmosphere, environment to sort of move into. And it was so quiet. I think one of the things that my mom said that she reminds me all the time is one of the first things I said when we finally moved into the house was, I guess I went to like the back porch or something, and I was just staring out the window, and I said something along the lines of it's like, oh, I really like it. It's so quiet. And I guess that kind of tells you a lot about me. It's sort of just that one phrase that I said that is just so quiet. And I think about that a lot, sort of, as I think about growing up in Chicago, sort of that quietness and how even that quietness changed in our neighborhood. Because as the years went on, I remember going to kindergarten, because I didn't go to preschool, so I had no sense of what preschool was. So kindergarten was my first foray into our educational system. And I remember like my classes were mostly white kids. There were a few other Latino students there, but I think probably in second grade was when white families started leaving the area. The white and Arab family started leaving the area at the time. And living through it, like I didn't notice it, but as an adult thinking back, I was like, oh, people actually left, and more, whether it was Mexican or other Latino families were moving in, Black families were moving in to the area. And I didn't know the term at the time of what was happening. And now you're like, oh, there's that white flight kind of term now that I know as an adult. And to live through that and not know like the mark that it has on you as a kid, because you don't know it until you're an adult and you start examining everything. I was like, that's such an interesting thing to now remember as an adult, and to know that you lived through it without realizing that you lived through it, which is so weird to me now. But I remember like my best friend, like kindergarten, second grade, she was a white girl, and her family ended up moving out. I don't know if it was like Naperville or Joliet, and that lost contact and never knew. But after that, like elementary just became a lot more predominantly Latino and Black. Like that's just how it went. And you got to high school and it was predominantly Latino and Black, and you had some Asian kids, you had some white kids in the foray there. And that now, as someone in their 30s and you're looking back, you're like, wow, like I kind of describe it as being in a bubble for a very long time, because I just didn't know any different. I didn't know that things operated in a very racial environment, because I was so, I would say maybe protected by it a lot, of because it was just wherever I turned, there was, other people that were Mexican or people that were from other Latin American countries. And then, I had, there was Black kids around and things like that. I did know that there was racial tension between Blacks and Latinos. That's always, I think, existed and been predominantly something that if you live in Chicago, you understand and and there's certain boundaries you don't cross. And when I mean boundaries, there's actually streets that you just don't cross, because one side is predominantly Black and the other side is predominantly Latino, and that sort of, and you even know that those sort of known boundaries to others are known by those that live in the communities. And that's, I think, just true throughout Chicago in general. But I also kind of think one of the things that shaped me growing up in Chicago was just faith. I would say I grew up in church. Sundays, there was morning service and there was evening service, and we went to both. It wasn't like one or the other. Like we were there practically all day. And sometimes, if there was lunch at the church, then we were literally just there all day. A lot of friends growing up were from church. Like I had my church friends who were just people that I grew up with. And even to this day, I still talk to a lot of them and am still in contact, and are maybe not as involved or not as communicated as we were before, but there are other people that shaped my view in life growing up, and and faith really shaped that as well. And so the church I grew up was a Spanish speaking church, evangelical church. So I definitely grew up under that umbrella, but very different from a white evangelical church, I would say.
Pointing that out, yes.
Yes. Because I didn't realize how different it was growing up in a Latino, Hispanic sort of evangelical umbrella versus a white evangelical umbrella. And that could be a whole other video that we can chat and talk about. But that definitely shaped a lot of who I am today. And just, growing up, my church was in Little Village. So while I didn't grow up there, I definitely went to church there and had still that connection to Little Village and, and the Mexican community there. and having that experience growing up. And a lot of it for me was, I remember holidays and birthdays were really shared with our church family. My parents didn't have a lot of family here in Chicago, in the US. I didn't have any cousins growing up. Like, I didn't have any aunts, uncles. My grandparents were all in Mexico. So I had a very different experience from, I would consider, from a very, traditional, families that have, other loved ones here, their extended family here. So my extended family ended up being my church family, and those were who I shared birthday with, and Christmases and New Year's and Thanksgiving and anything in between as well. So I think that really was and continues to just be my experience growing up, and sort of that developed my identity. And I think another portion of me growing up that I understand more as an adult than I did when I was growing up was my introvertedness. I didn't know that term until I was maybe in my late 20s that existed. And growing up as an introvert in a Mexican culture is very interesting.
Oh, it is. Oh my goodness.
And again, it was something that I didn't know and I didn't place, because it was one of those things where if you go to any party, whether it's a Mexican, party or other Latin American communities that have, you have to say hi to everybody, you have to like talk, and you have to like, just extend all this energy. And I hated it growing up. Like, I hated it, and it was a constant battle with my mom. Like, say hello. Like, did you say hi to everybody? And I was like, no. Why do I have to?
Yes.
Like, you say bye to so and so. And like, no. And then it was just this whole thing, and again, like, not having that knowledge of a part of who I am is to be like, no, this is how I navigate the world as just a person that I don't want to say hi to everybody, and it should be okay that I don't want to say hi to everybody. And I had that. There was a constant sort of struggle with my mom, particularly my mom, because she was just like, you have to say hi. My mom is the most, like, she just the life of a party. She just likes to talk, and she, and it's very much hostess with the mostest kind of attitude, versus her daughter over here that's just like wants to sit in the corner and just listen to the conversation and not have to like engage too much unless I feel pulled to do so. So all these things have really shaped growing up for me here, and I think just Chicago in general, the uniqueness of it, that it can allow you to grow up in a bubble until you step out of your community. And I think that's really where the shock kind of came into me, and sort of pushed me to like learn more about social justice and what that means, racial equity and things like that. Because I think once I left high school and I realized I went to DePaul University, and having to commute. I was a commuter student, so I didn't even live on campus because I needed to save some coins. And I was like, I'm not paying those extra, what I think it was like an extra $10,000-$12,000 to stay on campus. And I was like, you know what? We have buses, we have a train system. The L takes me right there. But then to kind of go in there and in some instances be maybe the only Latina in a classroom, or be one of like 3 in the classroom, and then having to learn that the world is very different from what you've kind of grown up in, and understanding that, and having to navigate that, and navigate the educational system that, as a first generation, you don't always know what to expect. I wasn't the first one to go to college. My sister was. But my sister was doing her own thing. She had her own things too, so it's not like she could handhold me through the whole process either. And she, and it was it wasn't always the expectation because she had her own things to do and things like that. So even being that first generation of just, you know, the second person to go to college, you just have to navigate it and learn it yourself. And you don't know what the resources are because your parents didn't know, didn't have that experience of college, and you don't understand it. And then realizing that as a commuter student, you're even more limited because you're like, okay, well, I need to take the L, I need to take the bus stops running at a certain time. So I can't stay for these extracurriculars that I would want to stay and be more engaged in. So I just have to take that and be able to, you know, there's a whole college experience that I think I missed out on because of that, but I don't regret it at all because I think everything kind of works out the way it should work out and you kind of have the experiences that you need. But I think if I had known some more things or I've known different, I think I probably would have done some things differently. But I think, you know, just growing up is just it's crazy to think back how much everything kind of sort of lands and
Right.
sort of just settles itself how it should. And you kind of learn from those and you take that. And I know like you and I have talked about just how now as, very, young women in their 30s and we're still trying to navigate this world, like how are we still navigating and how are we still having to do that? It was because, opportunities weren't always there. And if they were, you didn't know how to access them. And, and